to ask as many questions as possible, to present a whole lot of situations and juxtapose them and hand it over to the audience. I think for me that would be to patronise an audience. I'm really not evading your question, I promise.
Adding up, I would say that maybe the one privilege of an artist is that you don't need to come up with a didactic message to the audience. We are mostly asked, like, what does it mean and what does it stand for? But I guess it all starts with a very selfish, creative wish to give form to something you have in your mind. You just want to see something you have in your mind happening in front of your eyes. It may be a painting or a musical composition or a novel you're writing or a film, right? And that's already enough for me, although it sounds very selfish. And then out there, then you put it out there. Of course, you know there will be an audience, but I'm just very curious. And for me, the audience always completes the work, or hopefully never completes it. But it's up to you to contribute to the work. Right. That's why I also work a lot with strange juxtapositions. Also, the architecture, in many cases, doesn't illustrate what's coming up. Like in a narrative film, you would see a short dark road and it will announce a crime happening. I would not do that, probably. Like, I would rather speak about elephants and forks in that dark street. So I think there is it's just another method, but it's interesting to use moving image as a laboratory, and we are struck in this, we are handcuffed in this movie world to short film, long film, documentary. But why is that? There's absolutely no reason to do that. There's plenty of things we can do with that screen, and so I basically, from a very naive point of view, I'm using this as my own laboratory, and luckily I'm in this very great co-writer, co-fighter, co-chemist, co-chemist, chemist, is that the word?
There is another question at the back.
That's regarding the puppet sequencing. That's also, as I remember, connected to surrealism, right? I'm sorry.
He is mostly André Breton and a few other surrealists. Yeah.
Yes. So my question was at the beginning, because I couldn't remember all the sequence of the narration. Somebody was talking there about freedom. So was it kind of an irony that you talk about freedom in connection to the puppet master, and with all these puppets being there, is it implication that we're all puppets in somebody's hands? So including art and our reality?
See, now you're giving a meaning to something we created. I didn't force you to do that, but I'm happy that you read it like that. You're all free to do that. I mean, maybe a word about the puppets. They were, because there are a few people that weren't with us on stage. Suze Wächter creates them. She's a great puppeteer. She builds these puppets and plays with them as well. And most of them were pre-existing already. I found it beautiful to see all the 20th century passing by while we see this film, listening to voices from the 20th century. It's most influential artists. And sometimes there's a correlation. She talks about the dream, and Sigmund Freud comes into game. Sigmund Freud's son built the villa at the lake. Also, that's not important to know, but it's funny for me to know. And it gets very complicated there, because there's a lot of puppet things in the movie that you can find if you want, but you don't have to. Again, maybe as I'm mentioning Suze, I should mention a few, 2, 3 other people that were contributing enormously to the visuality of this piece. It's Erwin Prieb, who did the set design. It's Markus Stemmler and Fabian Schmidt, who did the sound design. And last but not least, Nils Fram and Ben Lucas Boyson, who contributed this wonderful score.
There is a question here right at the front, please.
I wanted to ask a sort of gendered question. I noticed like lots of the audience laughing when, for example, the words of Jean-Luc Godard were said in the mouth of a school teacher. And I wanted to know why you chose, like, there's like public women and private women. You've got the housewife, and you've also got the sort of CEO. And we're laughing because, you know, it's instead in the mouth of a woman, in my opinion, it sounds like it seems more ridiculous. Was this a sort of to play, like, why did you choose, Julian, for a woman to play these various roles? And Kate, did you sort of think of this while you were acting as well?
For me, I think the kind of the irony in the school teacher scene is just how it speaks to more the instructive nature of it, as opposed to the fact that it's a female school teacher. I think it was, for me, it was more about the context. But yes, it's screaming the obvious that most of these manifestos were written by men, and I think that was probably, you know, part of having a dissonance between the fact that you've got a woman inhabiting all of them, which automatically points that out, doesn't it? You know, I think it was also, you know, like having you know, when I was a woman playing a version of Bob Dylan, you instantly have a tension between what you're asked to invest in, and, you know, the language and the history of these manifestos and how they're being communicated, which I think is, you know, is a really interesting tension to have.
Many of the texts are very testosterone driven. When you read them and you feel the anger and the masculinity in them. And what we did is already prior to shooting, we calmed them down. Many of them, you read them, you think they are shouted and angry, but then we transfer them into some inner monologues which are very meditative and quiet and calm. So all that is, of course, also to investigate that masculine force in them and break it and see what happens to them. Again, I would start with a question rather than an answer. So giving them all to her was an experiment.
Yeah, a question at the back.
That was so wonderful, thank you. Why did you both decide to make it linear? What was that process from making it a kind of a...
We have had that question before. No, I'm happy for it because I would ask myself the exact same question when I see this and know it was an art installation before. And we're just laughing because we have had a few interviews today and some questions come up again and again. The reason is very technical, was technical at the beginning. I needed to finance the installation. And that's very difficult. I'm moving in the art world, not in the film world normally. And so I got some people to support me, convincing them to support us generously. But they needed a linear version because they came from the movie world or the TV world. There was a Bavarian broadcast involved and a media board in Berlin-Brandenburg. And the deal was like, I'm going to deliver something linear later, which I happily accepted because I wanted to do that art installation first. And then once we finished the installation, we had that problem to solve. And on the other hand, it was always in the back of my head, and I thought, like, it's also great because breaking with so many rules of filmmaking is kind of the attitude of a manifesto itself, like trying to break with this very narrow 3 formats in the film world, and bringing that into linear form and implanting it in this, like a virus almost, in this, for instance, in a festival like this, or later on in the movies, was for me an exciting thought. Although it was extremely, you can ask Bobby, the editor, it was very difficult to bring it into linear form. So we needed, in order to avoid the boredom of you, because there's no story, we needed to invent a visual narration. And that was a tricky thing to do, but yeah. Credit design helped, the music helped, and a bit of magics.
It worked, it was wonderful. Thank you.
We've got time for one more question. Yes, please, in the middle on the right-hand side, just here. A bit lower down.
Hello. First of all, would like to say in German, vielen Dank für diesen tollen Film.
Okay.
That's it. I would like to know from you, Kate, playing 12 roles, that's
13.
Sorry, 13. That's amazing. How do you prepare for something like that? And which of them was your favorite one?
Very quickly. I mean, to me, the process is always collaborative, whether it's a more traditionally structured film, or whether you work in theatre, or whether you work purely in an art context. And Bina and Massimo and Morag, the hair, the clothes and makeup and costumes. We sat with Julian in a room for a day and just said, okay, what will the silhouette be? What's the context? We put everything together and then we just did it. And the adrenaline was, and the fear was very deep. But I like working that way. And also I have this synapse in my brain that just sort of, I suppose the bigger the challenge, the more it just switches off, and I just go, oh well, can only fuck up and just go forward. I think, the bigger the risk, I think the bigger the reward, even if the eventual thing doesn't pay off. So it was incredibly exciting to do. It was fast and furious, and we often did several scenarios in the one day. But that's a huge testament to the crew and to Morag and Massimo, who were putting a beard on, and then suddenly, as a newsreader, and we were moving across Berlin. So it was a real, deep time collaboration.
Thank you.
She's too modest because it needs a talent as well to deliver that, and this never-ending curiosity. That was what most blew me away when we worked together. That Kate would, even if we worked for 14 hours, she would not stopping to ask questions to her character, to her role, and trying to memorize bits of it. And others came from an earplug, others came from a plate in the background. So it was all a rush and a trip in a way. And I think you can feel that fear of fearlessness at once in the movie a little bit.
But it was very, because we couldn't overthink things. You just had to say, well, this is the decision we're making right now. So, but it was mostly about, I think the biggest challenge really, apart from the speed with which we were working, was to decide, the night before, or often in the moment, what the tone was, because often, the character, what he or she was saying didn't necessarily make logical sense. So I had to find tonal sense. And so much. If you're not speaking the same language as someone, you can communicate, on an emotional level, on a physical level. And so I sort of wanted to make sure that side of the communication was also alive.
So the film is distributed by Neon Kim, and there will be a live event at the Tate on the 15th of November, and a general release on the 24th of November. So spread the word. Thank you so much both for being with us tonight.
Thank you very much.